Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are in the world. I appreciate you joining me. Um, so this is just going to be the last part of the lecture for this week. What I wanted to talk about before I get into the aspects of the hysteria that World War II um, fed on in terms of, getting people involved for the war, the reasons why people, joined up, whether they went into factories, whether they decided to go fight abroad, however they contributed to that war effort. I want to talk to you about the hysteria that led up to it. Um, Not just the response that happened as a result of excuse me, the not just a response in terms of what happened at Pearl Harbor. So I just want to be able to just make that, clear to y'all, because the discussion question is posted, and I did move the date. I moved it to Tuesday because for a couple reasons. I mean, I wasn't reading all of them on Sunday, and so I didn't really think there was much of a reason to give you guys till midnight. I mean, why not just give you till Tuesday and give you guys a couple more days? Because some of you post them, on Sunday, some of you post them earlier, and I just want to give you guys time so that you can also reach out to me with any questions. But this discussion question does have some videos, there's some articles, and just really want to see how you're engaging with it. It is building off of our conversations that we had about immigrants and this idea of what it means to be an American or who can be an American. And so we're building off of that in terms of comparing it to how Japanese Americans were viewed during the period of World War II, identified as, not just non-citizens, but they couldn't necessarily be people who could be trusted, right? These are individuals who are seen as the enemy because of their ancestry, right? And because the country is now at war with Japan, anybody who's associated with Japan, especially those of Japanese ancestry, are now considered potential enemies, traitors. They certainly can't be citizens. And so you're going to be looking at in that discussion is the parallels between how the identification process and identifying who exactly is a citizen or could be a citizen, um, related to the ways in which our current government, ICE in particular, is identifying people who are citizens. You may have seen much of the popular media, social media in particular, um, where, ICE agents are questioning certain people, stopping certain people, right? They're clearly not asking everybody if they're a citizen or to show proof. But they certainly seem to be targeting. And with the recent Supreme Court decision that has allowed the use of racial profiling, we've seen this ratcheting up in terms of ICE agents just simply asking people they suspect of being a non-citizen. Interestingly enough, they don't seem to be detaining or stopping people or questioning people's citizenship if they are white. And so, this is one of those questions. It's like, well, we have people in this country who are not citizens, but they're of German ancestry, they're of Scandinavian ancestry, they're of some sort of European ancestry, but they're not being questioned, right? So very similar in terms of that parallels I want you to look at in this discussion. It's like, well, what exactly does it mean to be identified as a perpetual foreigner? What does that mean to be identified as somebody who could never be a citizen because they don't embody the ideals, whatever those may be, racial, religious, social, cultural, in terms of what it means to be an American? And when you define that term, how exactly does that allow you to, um, you know, display these ideas of what it means to be a true American? What does it mean to make America great again? What does it mean to create an environment where being an American, being a citizen is only displayed in certain ways in terms of behaviors, in terms of physical attributes, in terms of performances, right? Think about that. And so you can definitely ask me some questions in terms of that. But quickly, take a look at the last bit of these slides, and I want you to definitely take a look at and understand that prior to our involvement in World War II, remember, the United States already has many systems in place that are overtly discriminatory. This is a country in the 1930s that is, highly anti-Semitic. It is a country where there is Jim Crow segregation, where there is, overt discrimination against anyone who is non-white. And so what is happening during this period in the 1930s before the United States gets involved, in particular as it relates to Jewish refugees, is that during the 1930s, Jews, as well as many Europeans, were trying to flee Europe because they were trying to flee the eventual or destruction that was happening. One of these cases that demonstrates how the United States was not just disinterested in trying to help anybody from Europe, but also overtly discriminatory to anybody of Jewish ancestry or Jewish background, was what happened with the MS St. Louis as well as the SS Drottningholm. And these are two examples in 1939 and another one in 1942, where Jewish passengers were systematically denied entry, refuge, into the United States simply because they were Jews. This really had nothing to do with anything else. These are individuals who, were trying to escape Nazi persecution. They were trying to escape what eventually would turn into the Holocaust in Europe. And in the case of the MS St. Louis, which you can click on this link and it'll show you a clip, 900 Jewish passengers were returned back to Europe. Many of them, would succumb to the Holocaust. And the other one, in 1942, the SS Drottningholm, fleeing Nazi persecution because at that point it was, clear and intentional in terms of what the Nazis were doing in Europe. But when the ship docked in New York, the FBI boards it, and they basically come on board and they find that there is a Nazi spy, right? His name is Herbert Karl Friedrich Barr, and he is a Nazi spy who was trying to claim refugee status to try to get into the United States. Because remember, we're already at war. Um, Now, what this does is this eventually creates enough of a public outcry, fueled by the United States government at that time, to justify not allowing anybody who was coming into the United States asking for refuge, asking for, protection, etc. The problem is that there was never any proof that this individual was actually a Nazi spy, right? The government wanted to use this story, wanted to use this situation and this individual as a way to basically fuel their anti-immigrant, anti-Jewish position. And what it did is that it basically put the United States in a position not really to hold the moral position that this was a country that was accepting people that would take in and fight for freedom and that would protect the rights of the weak, et cetera, et cetera. This once again demonstrates the United States in terms of its governmental position to show that, what, we only accept certain people. We're only going to be interested in certain individuals. No, we're not going to be a country that is, accepting of all people. And what you can see is that this parallel to what happened with the SS Drottningholm as well as the MS St. Louis very much parallel what is happening with President Trump in terms of his framing and his government's framing of immigrants in this country, why they're arriving, who's arriving, what they're arriving for. Um, you know, this is something that I really want you all to just take a look at in the subsequent slides. Take a look at the hysterical nature and the quotes that, that President Trump has used in terms of describing immigrants as, poisoning the blood of the country, this idea of an impurity, pointing out that immigrants are not human, that immigrants are dangerous, pointing out that immigrants are taking away jobs in the way of life. All of these aspects, all of this ratcheting up and this hysteria is what gets his base riled up, right? It's what gets them to be able to say, like, absolutely, he's doing a fantastic job on the economy. He's doing a fantastic job on immigration, right? But there's others of us who can clearly see that what he's doing is creating not just an environment of hysteria, but he's also sowing the seeds of discontent and hate amongst many people for individuals who for most of the basic reasons are here for an opportunity that they're willing to work for, that they're willing to try for, that they're willing to do everything that is necessary to just have a chance at something better, right? But of course, that's not the narrative that Americans ever want to hear, right? They don't want competition. They don't want to hear that. It fits much better into the narrative that immigrants are a danger, that they are criminals. And what you see President Trump doing, much as along with his advisors, is to be able to create an environment where that just is reinforced. So if this is, if this is to just prove that, yes, these immigrants are here because of crime, they're bringing their gangs, they're bringing their dangers. He is going to look for any way to frame that, as opposed to looking at all of the other millions of immigrants who contribute to our society, pay taxes, and are simply just looking for an opportunity in which to create a better life. But that's not the narrative that he wants to create, right? And so think about how that hysteria has continued to just reinforce and reiterate itself generation after generation. Same thing for Japanese Americans. Take a look at the documentary that I sent y'all, but you can also take a look at Executive Order 9066. Click on the link, and it'll show you the actual executive order from FDR, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in terms of the forced relocation of Japanese Americans and anybody of Japanese descent that was on the west coast of the United States. Most of these individuals were U.S. citizens. And so, the consequences of this is not just internment, but it's a loss of property, loss of opportunity, but it is also the continuance of a perpetual stereotype of Asian Americans always being foreigners, right? This is something that is not just reiterated with, Executive Order 9066, but it's also reinforced in our popular culture, our social media, right? If you look at the ways in which Asian Americans are often portrayed in social media or popular media, they're often portrayed as individuals with an accent. They're portrayed with individuals that are, always seemingly behaving as a foreigner, right? They're always an other. There's always this, question that is posed to them. It's like, well, where are you from? They're like, well, I was born here. I was born in, I was born in Washington, D.C. I was born in New York. No, no, no. Where are you really from? Right? This is that one question that is often, posed to Asian Americans. And it's always very interesting the way that Asian Americans are portrayed, because it's usually concentrated in like one of three ethnic groups. You're talking about Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. It's very rare that you actually see like, when the discussions of like anti-immigrant or anti-Asian behavior, you're talking about people from the Indian subcontinent, or you're talking about people from like Bangladesh, or you're talking about people from maybe Laos or Vietnam or like the Philippines, right? It's very interesting, given the history of our country, the ways in which Asians have often been categorized, right? This is the only group on our current census where they are categorized by country of origin, right? It's like, are you a Chinese? Are you Japanese? You Korean, right? Are you a Southeast Asian? Are you a Pacific Islander, right? All of these different categories. Whereas, if you look at our other groups and the way that they're categorized, it just says Latino, right? It doesn't say somebody, from Mexico versus Argentina versus Nicaragua versus Venezuela. No, those are all just Latinos, right? It's all just one big group, right? And so this is what is very fascinating, is that when you look at the distinctions and the ways in which these labels ascribe experiences, cultures, identity, populations, it often reflects the value of the society that's doing the ascription. And so that's what I want you to look at in the in the discussion question, is like, well, why exactly do we have these? Like, where exactly does this come from? We definitely have a history of these behaviors, but the question is why do they keep getting perpetuated? Like, what exactly does it serve us to, as a nation, to create a perpetual foreigner, whether it's in Asians or a perpetual immigrant in Latino Americans or a perpetual, outsider, right? Why do we do that? And so take a look at that. But if you have any questions or any comments or anything like that, just let me know. Just feel free to text me, call me. We can set up a Zoom. And yeah, that'll be that. I look forward to reading your critical analysis papers, or short answers, however you want to call them. But if there's anything you need from me, feel free to reach out anytime.